Thank you, Zainab. And yes, we're getting into that in just a bit, but just to reintroduce those who have joined us for this conversation tonight in studio, I have Kamodo Waiganjo. He is a former commissioner at the Commission for Implementation of the Constitution, is a constitutional expert, as well as Wanjiru Gikonyo. She is a national coordinator for the organization, the Institute for Social Accountability, very keen on matters devolution and getting the resource and empowerment there to that level. Joining us from their homes is Daisy Amdany. She is a women rights practitioner as well as the executive director at the Community Awareness Advocacy and Awareness Trust, and as well as a vice chairperson of the BBI steering committee, Adams Olo. And we'll be getting into that conversation after the break. Stay with us. On March 9th, 2018, there was the handshake between President Uhuru Kenyatta and opposition leader Raila Odinga. That led to the formation of a task force under the Building Bridges initiative that started the journey of collecting views from citizens on what they felt should change in the country for a better future. Well, they came up, the task force that is, with a report and handed it over in November 2019, after which a steering committee was appointed to validate their findings on the implementation of recommendations of the Building Bridges to a United Kenya. The steering committee, beg your pardon, why am I talking about community? But the steering committee has proposed administrative, policy, statutory or constitutional changes that may be necessary for the implementation of the recommendations contained in the task force report based on 9 key agendas. Now, what I will cite here will be from some of the legislative bills that seek to realize the proposals from the Constitution of Kenya Amendment Bill 2020. Now, this is not the full list and it's not the entire report summarized, but we will start with one of the top talking points, and that is the expansion of the executive. And under this, you see that the office of the Prime Minister, of course, after the President, will be established. He will be appointed by the President, and he will have 2 deputies, that is 2 Prime Ministers under him. And of course, as you can see, they're listed the role that the Prime Minister will be playing and where he will be picked from. A lot of talking points here on whether this was the main agenda in the first place, and we'll see about that because this report has a lot to offer in all fairness. Now, as you can see here, some of the roles outlined for the Deputy Prime Minister, and also the office of the Leader of Opposition is to be established. Now, this isn't necessarily part of the executive, but just felt of adding this in terms of one of the roles that will be added if this comes to fruition. The person who receives the second greatest number of votes in a presidential election and whose political party or coalition of parties has at least 25% of the members of the National Assembly. And the cabinet ministers as well. It will now be cabinet ministers and not cabinet secretaries who will be appointed from among members of the National Assembly, and principal secretaries from among persons recommended by the Public Service Commission. Now, something else that's been a bit sticky, and this got the reaction from the IEBC based on some of the proposals. And these are just some of the things that stood out for me as I was just going through it and still digesting it, to be very honest. I have the experts who have probably done cover to cover and have internalized every point. The task force recommends that we go to the next election with a clean slate to strengthen faith in the IEBC. 2 IEBC members to be nominated by political parties, 1 from the majority party and 1 from the minority party represented in the National Assembly, and 2 members nominated by a joint forum representing religious organizations. Now, the chair of the IEBC has said that they're being unfairly targeted and speaks of clawing back on the progress that we've made already with the constitution that we are under right now. And under corruption, a big issue in the nation, proposal to amend Chapter 6 of the Constitution on Leadership and Integrity to strengthen the fight against corruption by providing a mechanism for more expeditious conduct of investigation, prosecution and trial of corruption-related matters. And there's much more under corruption. This is just something that stood out for me. Something else into the judiciary. And yes, with the judiciary, they are talking about the establishment of the Judiciary Ombudsman, nominated by the President and approved by the National Assembly. And the Judiciary Ombudsman is to receive and conduct inquiries into complaints against judges, registrars, magistrates, and other judicial officers and other staff of the judiciary, just among some of the duties, as you can see there. Hope it's clear for you. And next to devolution, something I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about, because it talks about resources to the Mwananchi. And the proposals here, some of them, to increase revenue share from 15% to 35%. And feel free to correct me if I have misread this and talking to my panel here. There will be establishment of a ward development fund for each county to be used only for development expenditure. And something else that's getting a lot of reaction, it looks good at face value, through the Micro and Small Enterprises Act, give youth-owned enterprises a 7-year tax break. From the corporate world, or at least economists looking at this in terms of the sustainability. It looks like a good promise, but sustainability of this is a big question. Gender representation, main goal is to implement a 2/3 gender rule at all levels to incorporate more women in decision-making. Political parties are to implement at the principle that not more than 2/3 of members of elective or appointed bodies shall be of the same gender. Senate to have 94 legislators, and from all the 47 counties will have 1 man and 1 woman elected into Senate if this is to go through. And governor and deputy must be of the opposite gender. However, there is a question if this is obligatory or it's going to be a choice. And to the youth, last, definitely not least, at least from what I have chosen to highlight, establish the Youth Commission, which will include persons with experience in youth affairs and governance to encourage involvement of the youth in national matters. And yes, that goes to the Micro and Small Enterprises Act 2012 to give youth-owned enterprises 7 years tax break. Many people are asking how sustainable this will be. Let me start with Kamodo Waiganjo, and I'll get to something you said earlier on this matter, because as the commissioner in the Commission of Implementation of Constitution, you have a lot of faith in the Constitution that we work under right now. Be that as it may, what stands out for you? I won't ask if you support or not, but feel free to give us that.
No, the time for supporting and not supporting is long. We even need to see whether we're going to have a referendum. I think for me, when this process started, I was worried about two possibilities. One was the possibility of significant clawbacks on the current constitution, because I do know that this constitution does not have very many friends within the political establishment. So I was very worried that you'd have significant clawbacks. I am not convinced that there are any significant ones. I think the issue is debatable, but there's very little you can say is that this is an exact clawback, which should worry Kenyans. There may be some things that maybe one can discuss. But I think for me the most positive thing, and I think why I would support the document, even if there are some things that may be uncomfortable with, is the allocation of money to devolution. An allocation of 35% of our annual revenue. I don't think Kenyans understand how much of a game changer that is. If those figures had been used for last year on a 1.7 trillion revenue, this year the allocation would have been 560 billion shillings to county governments. We fought for 316. So we would basically be handing about 250 billion shillings to the county coffers. That is a game changer for every Kenyan. Of course, there are issues about wastage and misuse, but that's a different question, which I think can be looked to. What are the things that disappointed me? I think the gender question, it's very hesitant. It's generally very hesitant at 3 levels. One, on the National Assembly, it's not clear that those extra seats are for gender top-up. The Constitution leaves it almost, it says it shall include. Number 2, even for the governors, their deputies, it says the governor shall consider. It doesn't say they are required to. And then it is also very interesting that at the top 5, there is no gender question about the no more than 2/3. And yet that is where critical decisions are made. I think the other issue that surprised me, and I think for me is a concern, is the IEBC, because the IEBC has now been converted into a very strongly and partisan political institution, with 4 out of 7 commissioners coming as representative political parties. I am sure there are gains that can be made there in terms of the credibility of the result that they determine, because it is then owned by the politicians. But I think that also raises the questions about whether it's then still an independent commission.
Yes.
And what happens when we have a disagreement of a political nature within the commission. I think those are things that we need to warn ourselves.
Okay.
But I think on the whole, I would say many positive things, a couple of concerns here, but generally I'm positive.
All right, Wanjiro, I'll give it to you. I know you have a lot and plenty to say about devolution, but a lot has been said about the executive and expansion therein. But what really jumped out of the pages for you?
Yeah, going through the report, and you know, I beg to differ with Kamodo that the time for challenging this document is long gone, because I go back to the handshake. You know, the process and the output must be taken hand in hand. And you know, the question I have is, at what point did we, after the 2017 elections, decide that the death of Chris Musando, the computer-generated results, the rigging of the election warranted a change of the constitution? So I go back to, from the point when multipartyism was reintroduced in this country, we have had electoral fraud, except the 2003 election. We have had contested elections because of state interference in the election, rigging of elections. And what happened in 2007, 2017 is no different. And so when we then turn around and say, well, we need a national ethos, we citizens need to take responsibility, we're saying, look, the point is political responsibility. You cannot have a democracy without elections, free and fair elections. And our elections were stolen. And the people who perpetrated that are still in office. And this report doesn't speak to that. The second thing is, this report doesn't pick up on the where the national discourse had taken us. The national discourse took us up to Agenda 4. And Agenda 4 then gave us the Constitution of Kenya. So if you want to review the Constitution, you have to go back to Agenda 4. What did Agenda 4 say? There was a Truth and Justice Commission. What has happened around those things? Have they been resolved? There was the land issue, and there was a report, the Dongo Commission. What has happened around those things? So the BBI report, you know, it's a wish list, lots of recommendations about loads of things. Some are good, some are neither here nor there, some are actually already in law. Some are issues things that should have been implemented that haven't been implemented.
Right.
So my point is that the BBI process is a distraction from the failures of the administration. It's a distraction from the lack of accountability over 2017. So in that way, I think it's a very cynical process trying to manipulate Kenyans away from justice and truth.
Oh, and this is not a distraction. I really do have to take a break because for commercials, there's commercial interest in this. But Daisy Amdany and Adams Olo, I'm sure you were listening in as some of the first few comments were being made. We'll start with you when we come back from the break. Welcome back. We had some of the first few reactions in terms of what stood out for my panelists in studio. And those at home, that is Daisy Amdany and Adams Olo. I'll start with Daisy. The proposal to have at least, a senator from every county who is a woman. Does this come as good news for you in the issue of the 2/3 gender rule? And generally, what stood out for you?
Thank you, Mark, and good evening to everyone. First of all, let me start by giving my condolences for the passing of the Zamba Gitonga.
Yes.
It is indeed a loss to the country. Having said that, I want to start, before answering you, Mark, I want to start by just saying that I think that the conversation we need to have in Kenya is a conversation about whether we want to be governed by the rule of law or whether we just want to be led by the whims of politicians. And I'm glad that we have Professor Adams Olo and Kamodo Waiganjo here, who are constitutional lawyers. And I think it's imperative that they speak to this issue. Currently, as we speak, I think that the BBI is, the launch and the process that is ongoing is an act of impunity. We are in a constitutional quagmire right now with the the CJ's advisory with regards to Parliament, and the manner in which the executive is handling this whole thing is like it doesn't matter. So now you ask us whether, moving the women reps from the National Assembly to the Senate is a gain for women. The question we need to be asking is, for an administration that has, for the past 10 years, or at least let's say 7 years with these guys, exercised veto power over women's political rights, until and unless they give us what the current constitution guarantees to us, there really is no conversation that we can begin to have. And I think it's disingenuous for anybody to be mobilized around the BBI. The country is going through very many challenges at the moment. We are in a constitutional crisis. We are in a debt crisis. We are in an economic crisis. We're in a social crisis. We have a health pandemic. We have children who are not in school. We have unemployment, high suicide rates for people who have completely lost hope. And the best effort that our government can do for us is to bring us the BBI and tell us to expand the executive, because everything else is a carry-on. The main aim of the BBI is a serious clawback, particularly on the independence of the institutions, the checks and balances, and accountability of persons, duty bearers. So for me, the conversation that we need to have as Kenyans is, what are we going to do about the political class that have completely refused to address themselves to the challenges that are facing the nation, and have instead decided to take us on a joyride of something called the BBI. In my opinion, the BBI is political conmanship, and the mark is Kenyans. And I think that as Kenyans, we really need to say no, because this is not what they're there for. Many of the proposals that are made within the BBI are things that can be addressed through policy and administration, just the administrative issues. The most substantive issues that we are seeing here is a return to an imperial presidency, lack of separation of powers between the legislature, and an attempt to finally capture the one institution that has been independent under the 2010 Constitution that they have failed to capture, which is the judiciary, through this ombudsman that is appointed by the president, so that at all times the president, under the proposals of the BBI, would be the one to determine how Parliament and the judiciary operates. And this is particularly what Kenyans said they didn't want, an imperial presidency. And there are many other issues that are problematic with some of the proposals that they've made. But for me, the real question here is this. We have a declaration of Parliament being dissolved. Never mind that there is a stay order. The stay order has not voided the CJ's advisory. And yet, in the midst of this constitutional quagmire, we are running along as though nothing has happened. So I think that that's the conversation that we need to have. And I think that the media need to help us have this conversation as Kenyans. Okay. Because our political class is being very irresponsible.
And putting it straight to Adam Zolo, the vice chair of the steering committee, what do you say to people who feel that this is political conmanship, as Amdany has termed it, and distraction from the failures of the government, as Wanjiru Gikonyo has put it?
Mark, let me say that I can capture the process which we went through. Once we were gazetted in 2018, we went to all the 47 counties. In going to all those 47 counties, we made sure that those who were appearing before us were representative of all the 290 constituencies. Within the stakeholders, there were always women, there were elders, there were youth, there were religious organizations, there were representatives of the political class, there were persons living with disabilities. In addition to the process that went to all the 47 counties, we used to have, or we had, what you can call KICC stakeholder meetings. And in fact, even Daisy Amdany's group, she appeared before us. So I don't know what she means by political corpsmanship. And we gave her a chance to give us her views. The IEBC came before us. The Judiciary came before us. Representatives of the executive came before us. Constitutional commissions came before us. Experts, including Yashpal Gai, came before us, and so on. And the list of those who appeared before us are there. After we submitted our report in November, we were again, after 1 month, called back now as a steering committee to validate the report that we had had. And I can assure you that while some political parties like ANC did not come in the first, during the first report, they now came during the validation process. And we gave an opportunity to all stakeholders that I've mentioned to again come and tell us what is it about the report that they felt that didn't capture their aspirations and the like. So that was meant to validate the report. And in fact, I can say from the political class, it's only Jubilee that did not appear as a political party, but several of its members appeared either as pastoralist groups and the like. So
what do you say? What do you say, sir? If I may, because you've laid out the process thus far of validation of the report, and there seems to be questions already of how valid that process has been, having gone beyond its mandate. What do you tell them? The time that had been set aside for the steering committee.
Well, as we finished exactly by June 30, and we did indicate to the appointing authorities that we were done. And we waited because we couldn't force ourselves to give our report before we were invited to do so. So we finished within the timelines that we were given. And when we were asked to present the report last week, we did the same. So I think that was out of our hands, given that we had to wait for the appointing authorities to call us to submit.
So Daisy Amdany, he says you appeared before the committee, you gave your views, and he doesn't get why you would term this process that you seemingly, in his definition, took part in is political conmanship.
Listen, first of all, you remember when the handshake took place, everybody was relieved because it brought a sense of normalcy, as we have been saying, okay? At no point was the BBI about overhauling our constitution. It was about dealing with the issues, the 9-point agenda that we saw in the address by the president and the former prime minister. We did make our submissions before the task force, and Professor, in fact, I actually spoke with him and requested that we be allowed to make our submissions. And our submissions were very clear. We felt that the Constitution actually covered many of the 9 points, and that there were just certain administrative issues, and the 2/3 issue perhaps was the one thing that would necessitate constitutional amendment. Now, I think that the task force owes us a responsibility to tell us which Kenyans actually asked for this expansion of the executive. I think that is more of a political thing. And when we look at history, the history of, particularly from the time, the 2007, the Agenda 4 items, I think what is coming out clearly is that the push for a new constitutional order was very strong, and the people who were opposed to, or rather, there was very little room to oppose it. And so the strategy was to undermine it as time went by. Because what we've seen since 2013, since the coming in of the Jubilee administration, is a systematic clawback of the Constitution and weakening of institutions, culminating in now what we are seeing under the BBI. In the Constitution 2010, there are 10 clauses that are amendable by referendum. All others can be amended through parliamentary initiative, and others can be done administratively. But there are only 10 major issues that need to go to a referendum. And
before you underline that, Amdany, if I may, Weganja wants to jump in there.
Yeah, Mark, I was going to say...
Okay, let Kamoto jump in.
I was going to say that one of the challenges of this conversation is that, and I think it's unfortunate because we professionals and opinion leaders are doing that. We're starting to brand things, you know, which are not necessarily fact-based. Let me give you one example. I've now had the conversation about the capture of the judiciary. Now, that capture of the judiciary is because in a commission, I think, of 12 people, one person has been handed. That person is not just an appointee of a president. That person goes through a process, including approval by parliament. I am not sure that that one person has now taken away the independence of the judiciary. But you see, it's a very popular term because most people, Kenyans, don't do a lot of fact-finding. So I think we need to be careful about some of the terms we are using so that even if we disagree, at least let's base these things on facts. You see, one of the easier, they say give a dog a bad name and then you can be able to finish it. You see, even the argument that a lot of these issues could be done administratively, actually that is not correct. If you look at the issues that the report has resolved in terms of constitutional change, these are issues that even me and Nigeria have been in the Supreme Court. The question about the role of the Senate in the allocation of money, the fact that if the National Assembly, the national government cannot access money before the division of revenue is passed, we were in the Supreme Court on that issue. That issue is now constitutionalized. The question of issues like IPOA, you know, this body that oversees the discipline of policemen, there is no, you'd have had a strong institution body like that unless you had a constitutional underpinning. And so I think it's important that as we have this conversation, we help the citizen. We can disagree on opinions. Yeah. We can disagree on opinions, but at least let us accept what the facts are.
Yes, Daisy, real quick before Wanjiru.
You know,
and I also
let me
want
say
to jump
this.
In, Mark.
Okay.
I'm not saying that the Constitution is perfect. What I am saying is that right now, what we are looking at, those amendments that are being proposed, I don't think that we need to go to a referendum, okay? I think that even the proposals that Kamotho is talking about can be amended through a parliamentary initiative. But then the problem that we have right now is that Parliament itself is the subject matter of a court case because there's a Chief Justice advisory for the dissolution of Parliament for failure to enact legislation for the 2/3. So as things stand right now, the legality of Parliament has been called into question. And I think the law professors here should tell us, can a Parliament that is illegally constituted or unconstitutional in its composition go on to amend the supreme law of the land? We don't need a referendum to make the amendments that Kamotho is talking about. I don't think we do.
And let me say a very quick one. Let's not forget that this is also we can't also say about the judiciary, and when the judiciary makes a decision, we act like it doesn't exist. Yes, the CJ gave a decision. The court has suspended that decision, that advisory. The advisory, as we speak today, is not operational. Maybe the court will decide that it is effective. At that time, it will be effective.
It may have been stayed, but it has not been voided.
But it's either the court made a decision or it did not. Did the court stop the process?
I think the underpinning question here is that we have an executive that has violated the Constitution over 8 years. And then they turn around after stealing an election or interfering with an election and say that we need constitutional change. So the fundamental legitimacy of the process is at question. So, you know, Dr. Law will talk about the process. And, you know, public participation has been misused. And, you know, when he says, well, you gave submission, so the process is legitimate. No, the robustness of this process does not equate or meet the standard of a constitutional, you know, a constitutional changing process, because the consultations that took place around the CKRC and the constitution that we have was extremely robust, extremely participatory. So the level of participation of this process can be argued not to have met, you know, that standard. But the point, the underpinning point is the legitimacy of the process.
Okay.
And to my mind, yes, 35% to counties is excellent. But the reality is this government cannot give counties 35% because 1 trillion of, you know, we collect 1.4 trillion every year in revenue before COVID, and 1 trillion of that is going to pay debt. So we are So the point we are saying here is this process lacks legitimacy.
So
let me finish. Let me finish my point. The point I'm making is there is a good provision for counties, and I am a big, nothing stops the government as it sits now from giving counties 35%. The Constitution says a minimum. Okay. So the point I'm making is this is a red herring. The BBI is a distraction from the failures of the administration.
Let me hold you on that point, because although you have to respond before we take a break, and my director is on.
Yes, I have to respond. I think that when Wanjiru says that this process was not as robust, I don't know what Wanjiru wanted us to do other than to call people who came voluntarily. And we have all the data. I also heard Daisy saying that who proposed the executive. I can, for example, tell Daisy that even the Embrace for Women proposed an expansion for the executive. Court proposed expansion for the executive. All political parties that came before
I think it is not fair to use agents of the executive to cite popular view.
Could have come and opposed the expansion of the executive. That's the whole process of allowing everybody to participate. And we use the data before us to come up with this.
It's a political process.
I agree with Kamotho. Yes, it is a political process, and it is still a political process. And even the referendum that you're saying that we shouldn't go to, it's going to involve the people. There's going to be a collection of 1 million signatures. Those are the people of Kenya. How can you deny them the right?
Okay, that's another thing. Mark.
Yes.
He's telling us about the collection of signatures. Collection of signatures is a popular initiative. Now, how does the government go to the extent of bringing us a popular initiative when they have the ability to bring a bill to Parliament?
Okay.
Popular initiatives are not to be brought by government. What is the purpose of having then government political parties in Parliament?
Hold on that point.
Popular initiatives are for the ordinary citizens.
Yes.
And us people who are out here. Not for government to do. And if they're going to collect signatures, they cannot do it having used taxpayers' money.
All right, we've touched a nerve here, and it's something that we need to treat after the break. I need to take another break. Stay with us. Oh, how I wish this was on record while we were on break. A lot has been discussed. Daisy, you were just making a point there earlier, just before we took a break. And there has been, during the break, a lot of question about the legitimacy of the process, having an executive that has violated an advisory already. How can we trust this particular government to implement the changes that it is proposing in this report? Just, if you may, just take us back to what the case you were building.
So, first of all, Professor Adams-Olo has talked about collecting 1 million signatures. Now, that is a popular initiative. If indeed we are going the way of a popular initiative, and popular initiative is a legitimate way of amending the Constitution. However, the government has already members of Parliament. The leader of majority is from government. That is why they are there. They cannot come and tell us that they are following the route of a popular initiative and they are not following the process. So for me, the illegitimacy of the process already invalidates what they are doing because they are not even following the laid down procedure of the Constitution. So for me, the other question that arises is, we've had this administration since 2013. They have not followed this Constitution. They do not abide by basic constitutional principles. They do not abide court orders. So if we change the Constitution, what's going to change? It's the same people. And I think that the first thing that we need to do, can we implement what we have? Because if we fully implemented the current Constitution that we have, we would be able to address many of the issues that the BBI report speaks about. And some of the things that they're talking of don't actually need constitutional amendments. You know, you're talking about 7-year tax breaks for youth. The government already gives 10-year tax breaks to foreigners. They don't amend the Constitution for that. Why do they need to amend it to give it to locals? I mean, this thing, it is just running away from accountability and an administration that doesn't want to address itself to the real issues that are affecting the people.
Mark.
Right.
I was going to say, I think, again, to come back to the facts. You see, even something like the expanded executive, we forget that it was in the Bomas draft. We actually forget. You know, it's not a new thing. You know, it's something that Kenyans had discussed. Even the cabinet secretaries in parliament. These are issues that were actually in a very well-negotiated draft in which people had given views. So these things are not new. And then let me also disabuse us of the notion. A lot of the things that people are talking about are not actually in the constitutional amendments. I think people need to not mix up two things. There are the policy proposals in the report, which government has said they're going to implement without the need for constitutional amendments. The constitutional amendments actually relate to actual constitutional amendments, some of which actually arise from complaints. Even, for example, let me give you the Judiciary Ombudsman. There has been a complaint about where do judicial officers go for discipline. The Judicial Service Commission is comprised 80% by judicial officers. So it's become a trade union. Even if you have a problem, you can't take them there. So the Judicial Ombudsman is actually a necessary avenue. There are very many things, there are very many challenges. I could give you 10 possibilities. The MCA's term, which had said they'll serve for 5 years, that amendment has been changed to ensure that that does not happen. That could not have been done other than through a constitutional amendment. I could tell you 20 things. But I think the important thing, Mark, and I think the broad question is this. Are we saying the government that we have is perfect? No, I don't know of any perfect government. But that does that mean, therefore, that any proposals they bring are not, we don't even want to know what they are. You know, even if we are shooting ourselves, we are cutting our nose to spite our face. If we are saying that this government can be forced by the Constitution, and don't forget that even if you don't support the government that is there now, the Constitution is not for this government. There will be other governments that come in the future. They will find 35%. They will have to provide 35%. So we are in debt. So we have huge expenses. That is not my concern.
This is hard to convince someone who feels that the government has already violated.
Yeah, you know, Mark. One of the problems with one of the reasons I don't agree with what Kamodo is saying is that one, the issue of political accountability around the 2017 election is paramount. The issue of political accountability around debt is also paramount. And yes, much as he's saying that some of these are constitutional amendments, some are legislative amendments, we will engage with the legislative amendments. We will follow those up. But on the point of the BBI process, we cannot ignore the fact that this is distracting from the core responsibility of the current administration. And we have done this before. We did this before in 2007. And it's a repeat pattern. Where
you don't believe it will be bound, as Waiganjo says, with the Constitution?
So for me, no. The thing is, reforms don't deal with political accountability. We have learned that. Because Kenya has been in reforms since the beginning of the 90s.
What deals with
political accountability is the leaders who are there have to pay the price now. Okay. And the problem with the BBI is it's distracting from that. So yes, there are some good provisions. There are some bad provisions. There are some provisions here that, and then the document is very incoherent. For instance, you're talking about more money to counties. At the same time, you're re-centralizing other powers from the counties. At the same time, you then have provisions on public participation and on citizenship that don't align well with the spirit of the present constitution. This constitution is not starting from a point of liberty, liberation, of freedom. It's starting from a mindset where it almost implies that human rights have given Kenyans a bad ethos. Yes. So we need to pull back on these rights. Yes. You know, if you read between the language.
Let's throw it to Professor. He's waving, I'm told by my director. I'm not able to see that.
Create an office of a national rapporteur that manages public participation.
Professor.
Now, this is a constitutional county function.
Yes, Professor, a lot of convincing to do here. Let's give an opportunity to Professor as you respond to the issues of political accountability and legitimacy.
Yeah, Mark, I think the two ladies are using double standards. On the one hand, they are very assertive that on the two-thirds gender rule, there is a decision that has been made by the courts. And when it comes to the BBI process, when they are talking of the legitimacy, they are not accepting the fact that Thirdway under Ekuru went to court to question the legitimacy of BBI. And the same courts ruled that the process was legitimate. Secondly, when you look at the report, what they are saying are administrative. We have an administrative section. What they are saying is policy. We have a policy section. Then we have a statutory section. Then we have a constitutional section. And the way Kamotha has already presented it, some of the issues such as tax breaks are not included in the constitutional amendment. They are included in the administrative section. So they are not also representing the true picture of the report.
We also need to throw in here and response from you as a vice chairperson. If there are things that people are disgruntled or don't agree with within the report, is it cast in stone? Is there recourse?
Let me say this, that our report is meant for a national conversation. As I said earlier, what is projected is that after the report is received, then there'll be a pull-out of the necessary constitutional amendments that will be taken for the collection of signatures. Until that happens, there is still room for conversation. For example, I can give an example of the two-third gender rule and the persons living with disabilities, who have come out very strongly that the kind of affirmative action that the 2010 Constitution gave them is kind of watered down. And the question is that how could you do that when you had three issues you are trying to deal with? To meet the two-third gender rule that is already contentious, to meet the density population where the Constitution says that you will try and make as possible equality of the vote, and Article 100, which basically identifies the minority groups, which include persons living with disabilities. You might find that what we have proposed does not satisfy everybody, and we can have a conversation around it, that how can you do it better? That would be my view.
Right, and if it's doing it better, does that mean contents can actually change? Because it seems, or at least the picture that has been drawn, probably even by the media, is that we will then move to reduce it to some questions on the referendum, and then go for the referendum, and whether we vote for it or not, it will be adopted based on that. And it almost seems like it will replace the Constitution that is right now, or negate it.
No. I don't think that we are replacing the Constitution. If you look at what Wanjiro talked about, the CKICC process, in which he said that was a very elaborate process, that one we were replacing the whole Constitution with another Constitution. In this case, we are just amending the Constitution as provided under Articles 255 to 257, and that is not a total overhaul of the Constitution.
Right. The issue of basic doctrine, and we've gone to court on this, because some of the amendments proposed do challenge the basic doctrine of the Constitution.
Like which one?
Part of that, one of them, and I'll stick to maybe the sections that we are more invested in.
Yes.
One is devolution.
Which
right now, the Constitution gives us 2 levels of government. You can even argue possibly 3 if you consider the urban areas. Now, if you create a ward development fund that is then directing money to the local level, if you then re-centralize health administration back to the national level, you are fundamentally changing the structure of devolution.
Can I correct that?
Hold on, let me finish. Allow me to finish. Then there is the special treatment to be given to Nairobi County. And there's a rationale given for this. And the centralization of Nairobi has been in the offing for a long time. So what you see is that there is a clawback. On one hand, you're giving more money. And if I look at it, the mindset to me that comes out is that somewhere in the thinking, there's a thinking around, let's get regional economic blocks, possibly to be a higher level of devolution, of decision making. And what we might begin to see, and you see, we haven't been given the full thinking, but from what it appears is there'll be more money going to counties. Then you want to lock in the regional blocks, which is fine. They already exist in law. You then want to send some to the ward level. It means these counties are being neutered. You then take away the health function. You then take away the citizen engagement function, because you're creating this national rapporteur. So these are the inconsistencies. Right. Add to that, the changes that are being proposed in the, this kind of presidential system, bringing back in the cabinet system. You then have party lists. We are going from a presidential system now to a kind of back to the mixed parliamentary presidential system. And this has been criticized because it fuzzes the lines of accountability.
Okay.
So the problem is there are obscurities and inconsistencies in these recommendations.
And on that point, and there are many who will hold that point as well, feel that there's obscurities.
And you're the lawyer.
As the constitutional lawyer, Kamodo,
Yeah.
and as you wrap up, because we have to wrap up, what is a course to follow now? And for someone who's disgruntled, doesn't agree, what is done?
One is we need to read this document, because it's clear that even for us as experts, I don't think we have read the document. And let me correct you, for example. The Health Commission is not in the constitutional amendment. You can read it. It is not there. It is proposed in the report in the constitutional amendment. There is no proposal for a Health Commission. There is no health being taken back at all in the constitutional amendment. That's number one. The WDF is just about money. It just says 5% of the money 5% of the allocation to the counties will go to the wards. And that is only a right to ensure that you don't leave some wards out. You don't exclude wards. That cannot be a bad thing. The question of regional blocks, it is not there in the Constitution at all. It is not even mentioned. It is not even hinted at. I think what is important, there are some challenges with the draft as is. I don't think that it's the law of the Medes and the Persians, which can't be amended. That structure of government, the one of the prime minister and who the majority is and the leader of the official opposition, I think it needs some cleaning up. I think there's some thinking that needs to go into that process. And it can happen. The issue of that gender question, again, is not, it has actually taken us backwards. And I think it needs to be looked into. I would, for example, say, instead of creating 360 definite seats, say that we cannot go beyond 360, so that you give Kenyans the opportunity to vote for women. And if they vote for women, we can actually stay at 290. That, again, is something we can do. The issue of the top and saying the possibility that we'll have only one gender, maybe all women in another life, or all men, I think it is wrong, because that is where decisions are going to be made. So there are things that can be done. And I do hope Kina Adams are actually listening. But I don't think we should bastardize the whole document because we are unhappy with government, because it has let us down for whatever reason.
And to Professor, if you may just tell the people, because tomorrow it is being launched officially, then the process that will follow, just to buy in the confidence of Kenyans that this, as it is being drawn right now, as people are still trying to understand it, is not an end in itself.
Yes, I think, and Kamodo has really captured the mood of what we are trying to do. For us, where we sit, this is a national conversation that belongs to Kenyans. And we can't go to Bomas tomorrow and say that, no, it is a closed shop. Even if you have any views, we cannot bring it back. If there is a better idea out there, if there are better reasons out there, if there are areas in which we drafted and maybe it's not communicating well, then there's always room. Maybe the time might be shorter to do it, but I think that we are not closing the window.
So it will be released tomorrow, then what?
We will release it tomorrow, and then Kenyans, you see, tomorrow is the launch, and quite a number of people are going to speak, including the politicians from both sides of the political divide. And the Kenyans will be conversing. And if Kenyans decide that there are certain areas that we need to be improved on, and we are guided to that effect from the Kenyan people, that you need to still look at this, panel beat this, it can be done. Remember, Mark, the way Wanjiru was saying, she's talking of the presidential system, but Wanjiru will accept that the whole CKRC process that she was so positive about never recommended a pure presidential system. That pure presidential system was decided at Naivasha by the politicians. It was the kind of conversation that went on. And we are basically saying that even this one is a conversation. If there's something that Kenyans are saying, hey, it was not looked at, now that we have seen it, it should be put this way, as we are servants of the people, and we will listen.
Do you have an answer to the cost this will take for the Kenyan taxpayer?
Remember that there was a socio-economic audit of the Constitution that was done by the Auditor General's Office, by Parliament. Right now, I wouldn't say that we have costed it, but that would have to be done, yes.
All right. Daisy Amdany, your last comments to those who probably share your views, and in this process moving forward, even if you don't agree with it, what will you do?
First of all, I'm very disappointed to hear that Professor thinks that the two-thirds gender rule is a contentious issue. It is not. And I think that for an administration that has exercised veto power over women's political rights in Kenya, I would advise the women of Kenya and publicly spirited individuals to reject any proposal. Let us first implement the Constitution 2010 and specifically the two-thirds gender rule.
Okay, on that
because
point,
the BBI does not answer the two-thirds gender principle.
All right.
They should not expect any support from women. And we will mobilize women against it because this has been the persistent deception from our political class towards women.
Daisy.
When President Uhuru Kenyatta was coming into government in 2013, he said that women were tired of empty promises. Yet, he has given us the most empty promises because with a constitutional framework, he has completely refused to implement it. So I think that it's unfortunate. They shouldn't expect anything from women. And Kenyans should demand that first, let us get a properly constituted parliament. Then we can talk about amending the Constitution.
All right, all right. There's much more to say about this.
2022 is not far off.
Yes, yes, yes.
So let's go for elections. Let's get an administration that is willing to actually operate within the rule of law, and then we can talk about amending our Constitution.
To Wanjiru Gikon, a few seconds as you wrap up.
Political accountability. BBI is evading that. We will engage in the legislative, in the bills. We will oppose the constitutional amendments, but we will keep reinforcing it's about political accountability. We must be governed by rule of law and not allow our political leaders to give us showmanship, brinkmanship, and these kind of jamborees to evade the process.
You talk about political accountability. You have to be accountable with the time that I have. We're way past it, but I thank you for your time. Wanjiru Gikonyo, to Kamodo Weganjo, to Professor Olo at home, and to Daisy Amdany. The conversation continues online, and even tomorrow we'll be covering this particular launch of the BBI report at the Bomas of Kenya live from 9 a.m. throughout the day to break it down for you. It doesn't stop here. Sports is up next.